Kemy stood in the shadows of the kitchen, her heart pounding as she observed the house from a new perspective. Dressed as a maid, she was hidden in plain sight, her eyes fixed on the young woman in the dining room. She barely breathed, careful not to be noticed. The life she had built for her son had come at great cost, and now, she feared that everything could be undone by a woman who cared only for wealth. Jane's voice broke the silence, sharp and demanding. "Get that tray over here, now," she snapped. "And don't stand there like you have nowhere to be." She glanced at the staff with disdain, as if they were nothing but furniture to be moved around at her whim. There was no kindness in her words, no softness in her gaze. Every command that left her lips dripped with contempt. Kemy's gaze remained steady, watching every movement, every word. A deep, unsettling feeling churned in her chest. She had been right to worry. Jane was not who she seemed to be. Kemy had hoped she was wrong, that she had misjudged the young woman. But now, with every passing second, her concerns grew clearer. Jane was playing a dangerous game. She wasn't here for love. She was here for something else entirely, something Kemy could not allow her son to fall victim to. "Do you think I care about your wealth?" Jane's voice rang out, loud enough for Kemy to hear. "It's all about what he can do for me, not about how much money he has. He needs to know his place, and I'm the one who will make him see it." The words were like knives, each one cutting deeper into Kemy's soul. Jane's intentions had been laid bare, and they were far darker than Kemy had ever feared. Kemy's hands clenched into fists, hidden beneath the folds of her apron. She would not let this woman destroy her son. No matter the cost, she would do whatever it took to protect him. As Jane turned away, dismissing her with a cold glance, Kemy's eyes narrowed. There would be no more waiting. She would act swiftly, decisively. The test had begun. Kemy had to know for sure. She had to confirm what she already suspected: Jane was not the woman Henry thought she was. She would play her part, observing, listening, and quietly setting her plan in motion. The time for uncertainty was over. Kemy's heart sank as she watched Jane walk away, her arrogant demeanor filling the room. This was not the future Henry deserved. This woman was dangerous, a manipulator. Kemy felt the weight of her love for Henry, knowing that if she did not act soon, he would fall into a trap that would ruin him. The worry gripped her chest as she considered what might happen if Jane stayed in his life. She stood in the stillness, her thoughts a storm. This was no longer just a test. It was a fight for her son's future, and Kemy would not lose. Jane's intentions were clear now, and Kemy could feel the tension tightening around them. She couldn't allow this to continue. Kemy's mind raced, the urgency pressing on her every thought. She needed to know everything, how far Jane was willing to go to get what she wanted. The plan was set. The test would continue, and soon, the truth would be revealed. Kemy had no choice but to watch closely, waiting for the right moment to act. Kemy stood alone in the corner of her family's compound, her heart heavy with the weight of their rejection. The news of her pregnancy had spread like wildfire, and her family's shame had turned into scorn. "You are nothing but a disgrace," they said, their words cutting through her like a hot knife. She had never expected their love to turn so quickly into judgment, but she knew one thing for sure: she had to survive, for the sake of her unborn child. With no family to lean on, she set out on her own, determined to create a life that would never make her son feel the pain she had endured. She worked from dawn to dusk. At first, it was the menial jobs that kept her going, washing clothes for others, scrubbing floors, and taking on any task that would pay a coin. Kemy never once let the exhaustion break her spirit. She knew that the only way to provide for Henry was through her hard work. At night, after the day's labor was done, she would hold her son close and whisper promises to him. "You will never know hunger. You will be more than I ever was." It was these words that kept her going. The hope that she could raise a son who would not have to suffer as she had. As Henry grew, so did Kemy's sacrifices. She didn't just teach him to read or write, she taught him to live with integrity. "The world will judge you, my son, but do not let their words change who you are," she would say. "Let your kindness be stronger than their harshness." Henry's hands were small, but he worked beside her, learning the value of every penny, the worth of every task. When other children played, he worked, shining shoes, helping neighbors, always with the goal of showing his mother that her sacrifices were not in vain. Through every sacrifice, Kemy's love for him grew stronger, and he, too, grew stronger in return. Years passed, and Henry flourished. He had inherited his mother's resilience, her determination, and, most importantly, her integrity. The business he had started with little more than his mother's encouragement had turned into a small empire. But despite all his success, there was a cloud hanging over him, a feeling in his heart that something wasn't quite right. Jane had entered his life at a time when everything was falling into place, but as his relationship with her deepened, so did his doubts. Her beauty, her sophistication, and her ease in his world of wealth drew him in, but a nagging voice inside him refused to quiet. Kemy, too, had noticed the way Jane looked at him, not with love, but with a sharp, calculating eye. The more Henry spent time with Jane, the more unsettled he became. She didn't ask about his dreams or ambitions. Instead, she seemed more interested in his status, how much he could provide, what he could do for her. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Jane would often say, her voice dripping with meaning. "It must be nice to have everything handed to you." Henry didn't respond, unsure of how to handle the unease that was growing inside him. Kemy watched from afar, her instincts screaming at her that this woman was not who she appeared to be. She had always trusted her gut, and it had never failed her before. Jane's subtle mockery of the working class was clear as day. She would dismiss the help, never lifting a finger to clean or offer a kind word. It was the little things that worried Kemy, the way Jane looked down on the people who had worked hard to build their lives, the way she treated those who had less. It was not kindness that flowed from her, but entitlement. The seed of doubt grew deeper in Kemy's heart. She had always worked hard to protect Henry, to shield him from harm. But this woman was a threat in a way Kemy had never imagined. Kemy's thoughts churned with worry. She could not allow her son to be swept away by a woman whose only interest seemed to be what he could offer her. But how could she prove it? How could she show Henry what lay beneath Jane's perfect exterior? Kemy made a decision. She would test Jane. Disguised as a maid, she would watch, listen, and wait for the moment when Jane would reveal her true nature. She prepared herself for the challenge, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. If Jane was as dangerous as Kemy believed, she would expose her before it was too late. No one would stand in the way of Kemy's mission to protect Henry, not even the woman who had captured his heart. Kemy's heart ached as she watched Jane, but her resolve hardened with each passing day. The test would begin. She would find out what Jane truly wanted, and she would stop at nothing to make sure her son never fell into her trap. Time was running out, and Kemy knew she had to act fast. Kemy stepped into the mansion, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Disguised as Abo, a humble maid, she kept her head low, blending into the background, careful not to reveal her true identity. She had come here for one purpose, to protect her son from the woman she believed would bring him nothing but harm. As the days passed, she quietly observed the house and its people. She had to understand what Jane was truly after, but she had to be patient. Her son's future depended on it. From the very beginning, Jane's coldness toward her was clear. "Abo," she snapped, barely glancing in her direction. "Take that tray to the kitchen now. And make sure it's done properly." There was no kindness in her tone, no recognition of Kemy's hard work. Jane looked at her as though she were no more than a tool to be used. It was clear she saw the staff as beneath her, as nothing more than servants meant to do her bidding. Kemy's hands tightened around the tray she was carrying. The woman's attitude stung, but Kemy remained silent, keeping her emotions in check. This was the role she had chosen to play, and she would play it well. Days turned into weeks, and Kemy's disappointment grew. At first, it was subtle, a dismissive glance here, a condescending remark there. But it didn't take long for Kemy to see the true depths of Jane's character. She wasn't simply disrespectful to the staff, she was manipulative. Kemy watched as Jane pushed Henry to make decisions that benefited her personally. She would Flatter him with sweet words, then twist his arm, making him feel guilty if he didn't comply. Jane never seemed to care about his well-being, all that mattered to her was what she could gain. It was a far cry from the woman Henry had described to his mother, and Kemy's worry for her son's future grew each day. Kemy couldn't ignore the emotional manipulation Jane was using on Henry. She saw it clearly now, the guilt trips, the small, nagging demands. "You didn't get me that gift I wanted," Jane would say with a pout. "I thought you really cared about me." Kemy saw how Henry would crumble under her words, how he would try to make up for every little thing he missed. He was a good man, raised with values of kindness and integrity, but Jane had a way of making him feel as though his love for her wasn't enough. Kemy's heart sank every time she witnessed this. She knew her son well. He was loyal and generous, but Jane was taking advantage of that loyalty, manipulating him for her own gain. The pressure was starting to weigh on Kemy. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she could reveal Jane's true nature without exposing herself. She couldn't keep pretending for much longer, and the fear of what might happen if she failed made her feel desperate. Every time Jane manipulated Henry, Kemy's heart twisted. She had to act soon. Her son's future was at risk, and time was running out. It was then, during one of the quiet afternoons, that Kemy overheard a conversation that would change everything. Jane, unaware of Kemy's presence, was talking to a friend about her plans. "He's so easy to manipulate," Jane's voice dripped with satisfaction. "I'll trap him with a child. That'll tie him to me forever. And once I've secured my place, I'll take everything he has." The words cut through Kemy like a knife. Jane's intentions were clearer than ever. It wasn't love she wanted, it was control. She wanted Henry's wealth, his status, and she would do whatever it took to secure it. Every word Jane spoke confirmed Kemy's worst fears. This woman wasn't just interested in Henry for who he was, she was interested in what he could provide. Kemy stood frozen in place, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This was no longer just a test. It was a battle to protect her son from a woman who had no regard for his heart or his well-being. Kemy knew what she had to do now. She would expose Jane for who she truly was, no matter the cost. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and Kemy's resolve grew stronger. She would not let her son be deceived any longer. Kemy stood in the doorway, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. The evidence was undeniable, clear in its cruelty. Jane had manipulated her son, and Kemy could no longer sit in silence. The time had come to confront Henry, to protect him from the woman who had been deceiving him for so long. She had watched and listened, gathering the proof that would expose the falsehoods surrounding Jane's intentions. Now, her son needed to know. She steeled herself, knowing that this would change everything, but it was necessary for his future. As she gathered herself in front of Henry, her hands shaking with the weight of what she had to do. "Henry," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She played the recording, each word from Jane a sharp reminder of how far the woman was willing to go to manipulate him. The sounds of Jane's own words filled the room. "I'll make him marry me, trap him with a child, and secure my place in his life forever. I need his wealth. That's all I care about." Henry's face went pale. His eyes widened with disbelief as the truth hit him. The room seemed to spin as he struggled to make sense of what he had just heard. He sat still, his mind racing to process the shock. His trust had been shattered in an instant, but the confusion lingered, filling him with a strange unease. His mother's love had always been constant, but this betrayal from someone he had trusted, someone he thought he loved, felt like a wound too deep to heal. That he turned to Jane, his voice rising with anger and disbelief. "Is this true? Did you really say this?" Jane, caught off guard, stumbled over her words. She quickly tried to cover up the truth with lies. No. You don't understand. That's not what I meant. It's all a misunderstanding." Henry's frustration boiled over. "A misunderstanding? I've trusted you, and this is what you've been doing behind my back?" His voice cracked with emotion, but his resolve grew stronger. "Explain it to me, Jane." I want the truth now. Kemy's voice broke through the rising tension. It's time. You heard it all, Henry. She's been using you from the very beginning. She doesn't love you, she loves what you can give her. She turned to Jane, her face hard. You've played with my son's heart, and now you'll face the consequences. Henry stood motionless for a moment, his anger mixing with hurt as he processed the situation. He turned back to Jane, his voice cold. Leave. Now. I've seen enough. The truth is clear. Jane's face twisted with disbelief. You can't be serious. I've done everything for you, Henry. Don't you see what we had? She moved toward him, her voice pleading, but her words were laced with desperation. Don't throw me away like this. We can work this out. Kemy stood firm, her protective instincts rising. No, Henry. She's deceived you for far too long. Don't let her make you feel guilty for seeing the truth. Henry's face flushed with anger as he stepped away from Jane. I won't be manipulated any longer. You've shown me who you really are. He turned away from her, his trust in her shattered beyond repair. Jane's eyes widened as she tried one last attempt. Please, Henry, don't do this. I only wanted to protect myself. You have everything, your wealth, your success. I need you. She grabbed his arm, her voice breaking with false emotion. I was just trying to secure a future. But Henry, no longer. Fooled, yanked his arm away. You never cared about me. All you wanted was my money. I'm done with you. His words were final, filled with a strength that had been awakened by the truth. Kemy stepped forward, her voice commanding. You don't have to listen to her anymore. She's played her last game. She looked at Jane with cold determination. Leave my house, and don't come back. Jane stood there, her face crumpling with anger and frustration. She had no more words, no more excuses. Slowly, she turned and walked out, her steps heavy with defeat. As the door closed behind her, Henry stood in silence, his body trembling with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. His mother walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. I did this because I love you, Henry. You deserve better than someone who would use you. Tears filled Henry's eyes as he looked at her, his heart aching with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you, Mother. I was blind, but you saved me. He embraced her, the weight of the betrayal still hanging in the air, but the bond between them now stronger than ever. Kemy held him close, her heart swelling with pride. You'll see, my son. Real love is built on trust and respect, not manipulation. You will find happiness, but you have to let go of what is false. Henry nodded, his mind clear for the first time in months. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, but it was a lesson he would never forget. His mother had protected him, as she always had, and now it was time for him to move forward, free from the lies that had once clouded his heart. Henry sat alone, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He had trusted Jane, believed in her love, and let her into his heart. But now, with the lies exposed, the shame of his choices felt unbearable. How had he let his desire for love cloud his judgment? He had heard his mother's warnings, had seen the signs, yet he had ignored them. His thoughts were a storm of regret. How could I be so blind, he muttered to himself, his voice breaking the silence. I let her fool me, and in doing so, I hurt the one person who's always been there for me. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at the pride he once had. But he knew one thing, he would never be manipulated again. I'll listen to my heart, my instincts. I won't let anyone control me like that, he vowed to himself. The lesson was painful, but it was one he would never forget. As Jane was escorted out of the house by security, she pleaded for forgiveness, her voice full of desperation. Please, Henry, don't do this. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. Her eyes were filled with tears, but Henry remained unmoved. The days he had spent believing in her were now a blur of deceit, and he knew he could no longer be swayed by her empty words. His heart ached with the memories of their good times together, the moments of happiness he had once believed to be real. But now, they felt like a distant dream. "I thought you cared for me," he said, his voice low, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "But now I see it was all a lie. You were never really with me." Jane tried to grab his arm, her grip desperate, but he pulled away. "I trusted you, and you betrayed that trust. You can no longer be a part of my life." The room felt heavy, the tension thick as Jane stood there, pleading and begging, but her words fell on deaf ears. She had lost her grip on him, and no amount of tears or sweet promises could change the truth that now burned in his heart. With a final, cold glance, he turned away, and Jane left, her cries fading into the distance. Kemy watched from afar, her heart breaking for her son. She had always known he would learn the hard way, but this moment felt too heavy. When Henry walked toward her, his eyes filled with sadness and regret, Kemy opened her arms wide, embracing him with all the love she had always carried for him. "Henry," she whispered, "the world will always try to lead you astray. But you must remember that love is built on trust and respect, not manipulation or wealth. You cannot measure love by what you give, but by what you are willing to give of yourself." Henry listened intently, her words sinking deep into his heart. He had spent so much time chasing the wrong things, wealth, status, the approval of others, and now he understood. "I always thought I had to prove myself," he confessed, his voice quiet but strong. "But I see now that my worth isn't in what I have, but in who I am." It was never about her or anyone else. It was about me choosing the right path. Kemy smiled, pride and love filling her heart. "You are stronger than you know, my son. True love comes from within, and you are worthy of it." The weight of his actions slowly lifted as Henry began to rebuild his sense of self. He spent the days reflecting on his past, the lessons learned from the pain and betrayal. He started to see the true value of what he had, the love of his family, the strength of his own character, and the peace that came from trusting his own instincts. As he spoke with friends, sharing his newfound clarity, he realized that happiness didn't come from riches or admiration. "I've spent too long searching for validation outside of myself," he said. "But I now know that true happiness comes from the people who truly care for me and from within me." Kemy watched with a smile as Henry slowly began to rebuild his life. Piece by piece. "I've always been here, Henry," she said. "And I always will be. But now, it's your turn to build your future on your own terms. Find someone who will love you for the person you are, not for what you have." Henry looked at his mother, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You've always been my guide, Mom. Through everything. You showed me what it really means to love and be loved." Kemy's blessing was all Henry needed. "You are ready now," she said softly. "You are ready to move forward, to build a life that is truly yours." Henry embraced her tightly, feeling the weight of her love and wisdom fill his heart. He had learned, through the harshest of lessons, that true love, trust, and respect would guide him forward. With his mother's blessing, he stepped into a new chapter of his life, stronger, wiser, and more certain of the path ahead. He looked ahead with hope, knowing that his future would be built on the foundation of real love and integrity, and that no one would ever take that away from him again. His journey had only just begun. Kemy sat beside Henry, her presence a quiet strength. She had watched him grow, had seen his heart ache and his spirit falter, but now, in this moment of clarity, she felt the need to share the wisdom she had carried all her life. "You see, Henry," she began softly, her voice steady, "true love is not built on what one can give, but on what one is willing to give of themselves." Henry turned to her, his eyes focused on her words, hanging on to every syllable. "Loyalty, kindness, understanding, these are the roots of a strong and lasting partnership. Wealth will fade, but these values will remain." Her gaze was steady, as though trying to plant the seed of truth in his heart. When two people care for each other deeply, not for what they have, but for who they are, that is where true love lies. It's not about grand gestures, but the everyday care that builds trust. Henry nodded, the words slowly sinking in. His mind began to untangle the confusion he had carried for so long. I thought love was about what we shared, what I could give. But I see now it's not about the things I can offer. It's about trust, the bond we share, and how we lift each other up. He paused, his face softening with realization. You've always taught me to do what's right, no matter the cost. But I didn't understand it fully until now. Kemy smiled gently, her eyes warm with pride. You've learned, my son. And that's more valuable than anything else. Henry sat back, the weight of his mistakes heavy on his heart, but his mother's words gave him strength. His past choices felt like lessons now, not failures. He understood that love wasn't something to be measured by material wealth. It was found in actions, in mutual respect and trust. He had been blind to it before, chasing after things that didn't matter, but now he knew better. I won't make the same mistake again, he said with conviction, his voice strong. I won't let material things cloud my judgment. Trust. Honesty, those are the foundations I will build on from now on. The realization was powerful. Henry had always known he had to work hard to succeed, but now he understood that true success was in the connections he formed, in the integrity he held on to, and the people he surrounded himself with. Later, as he spoke with a close friend, Henry felt the weight of his transformation. I used to think that success was about wealth, about having more than others. But now, I know that the richest people are those with honesty and integrity. His voice was steady, filled with a new purpose. I want to build a life on values, not things. I want to surround myself with people who see me for who I am, not what I can give them. His friend smiled, seeing the change in him. You've learned a lot, my friend. You'll find peace in that. Henry smiled, knowing his path was now clear. He was ready to step forward, not looking back, but embracing the life he had chosen. To build the day as time passed, Henry felt the peace settle within him. He had made the right decision, he had rejected the false promises of wealth and the manipulation that came with it. In choosing to live with integrity, he found something more valuable than anything money could buy. Love, respect, and trust were now the pillars of his future. He was ready to embrace true happiness, free from the deceit that had once held him captive. With a renewed sense of purpose, Henry knew he was prepared for whatever came next. His future would be built on the foundation of real love, strong, honest, and unshakable.